Well, I am so excited to be here today with Josh Maurer, one of the play-by-play broadcaster for the Milwaukee Brewers. Josh, thanks so much for coming. You have big shoes to fill because last year on the show I had Lane Grindle with me, so we're excited you're here.
Jason, thank you so much for having me. Well, if I get to follow Lane Grindle, I guess I'm doing something right.
Exactly. That's how I feel. That's why we're so excited to have you come as well. We knew you were going to do a fabulous job. So you joined the Brewers in 2022. Let's talk a little bit about the journey and how you got there and when you got excited about doing broadcasting, and go through a little bit about your background and how you came to Milwaukee.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny, some people, it takes them their whole lives to figure out what they really want to do. I had the either fortune or misfortune. I always kind of go back and forth as to which one it was. But when I was very, very little, I knew that I wanted to be a baseball play-by-play broadcaster.
That's amazing.
Right? And I actually even remember the moment that it happened. I was lying in bed I think I was 11 years old one night. And I grew up in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So I would listen to the Philadelphia Phillies games on my radio as I was trying to go to sleep every night. And I would listen to their broadcaster, Harry Callis. And one night I had this epiphany. I'd like to do that. And I did. Literally, this is the nerdiest thing anybody's ever said on your podcast. But I, from that moment on, really strove to get to where I am right now and dedicated the majority of my life to it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you do any broadcast type stuff when you were back in high school, or talk about that a little?
I started working as a behind the scenes production guy because that's what you could do in high school. And I had an internship at the sports television station in Philadelphia. And then I went to the University of Maryland in college for my undergrad and started broadcasting on the student radio station. So I would call basketball and football, and then, of course, baseball games, in addition to the other sports, soccer, lacrosse. And you could do that in college without the pressure of having to keep your job. And you could learn and go through your own mistakes without the pressure of being a professional at it. So that was the best training ground that I ever had, was actually calling games in college and learning how to do it and cutting my teeth in play-by-play.
When you were at Maryland, did you get a degree in broadcasting?
I did. I was a broadcast journalism major.
And so was that a natural in then to be able to call the games at Maryland?
It was. Although the student radio station was totally independent of the College of Journalism, which, there were College of Journalism at Maryland and in most universities, they're preparing you more for being a reporter.
Okay.
There's not a lot of classroom work that teaches you to do what I do.
Right.
And that it just has to be practical experience.
Yeah. Well, and you have to have the voice for it like you have.
Well, I hope I do.
Yeah, definitely you do.
I try. I've worked on my voice over the years.
When I was looking at your background and it talked about places that you have broadcasted, it said Boston College, ACC Network, NESN. I'm not sure what NESN is, but obviously NBC and ESPN I'm familiar with. Talk about that stage then. You graduate from Maryland and you're trying to break in and do what you've been dreaming about since you've been 11 years old.
I think the biggest thing that I've always tried to do is just always move forward. So whatever the job that I was able to get, I wanted the next one to be a little bit higher up on the food chain. And so I also really tried to never say no to a job offer that I had. So I graduated from college. I got my first broadcasting job in independent league baseball in 2003. And I was the studio pre- and post-game show host for an independent league team called the Brockton Rocks in Brockton, Massachusetts. And it was a grind. It was what an eye-opening experience. Yeah. I worked in the studio, so when I would be at the ballpark during the day doing whatever it is that you had to do in independent league baseball, you wear many hats. So I would pull the tarp. I would write the game notes. I would update the website, all that stuff. And you'd be at the ballpark during the day. But then when everybody was coming, the fans would come and the game was about to start, I had to leave. And it killed me every night. I would go to this station. And I sat in the studio of this AM radio station in Brockton, Massachusetts by myself every night for the entire summer.
Oh, my.
And I did the pre- and the post-game show. It was me and this cat. there was a three-legged cat who hung out with me every night. He was my buddy. And I finally asked someone at the station, why is this cat here? They said, oh, you didn't figure it out. We got a mouse problem.
Oh, that is hilarious. You know you've made it when you're in a station in the AM radio with a three-legged cat. And
Exactly.
you know you're on your way when that happens.
And I was on my way. So I from that moment in Brockton on, I made the baseball journey of a lot of players, which I'm proud of. I went from independent league baseball to single A baseball. I worked in Charleston, South Carolina for the Yankees single A affiliate.
Okay.
Then I was in double A in Trenton, New Jersey, Yankees organization again. And then I went to triple A for a long time in the Red Sox organization. So I actually literally climbed the rung of professional baseball until I finally got to the major league.
That's amazing. What got you to the major leagues? Tell us the one thing, the break, like I always say, there's so much luck and timing to all of our success. That's the first thing I always say when I talk about how the journey's been for me. I've been at this firm for 30 years, and I think back from when I started to where I am now, and there's just so much luck and timing. So I want to hear from you. What do you think was the break, the opening the door and you went right when other people went left? What's the one thing you can point to that got you to the major leagues?
Well, I wish, Jason, I wish there was one thing.
Okay.
Because if there was, then we'd all do it, right? I think for me, the biggest attribute I had is that I just never quit.
Yeah.
I spent 19 years in the minor leagues, which is longer than most
that's
that
a long
ever make it to this level. Usually you're going to make it in a certain amount of time or you're just not ever going to get there. And I thought I had gotten to the point where I was never going to get there, and several times. In fact, I'll tell you this, in 2020, I had made up my mind. I had a decision that was going to be it for me. It was going to be my last year. I was going to turn 40 after that season. I had worked with a whole slew of partners in AAA who had gotten major league jobs, and I didn't. I was still there. And I thought, well, once you're 40, it's probably too late to pivot. And I didn't want to be the 65-year-old codger in a minor league press box. So I figured this was about time. And then, as everybody knows, the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
The minor league baseball season got canceled. The major leagues eventually played during that pandemic year, but the minor leagues, they never did. So I was waiting tables and realizing how much I actually still enjoyed my job.
Right.
And so I stuck with it. And I did one more year. And then the Milwaukee Brewers had a job opening, and I applied for it. And there were many steps in the process and interviews and people to meet, and then they offered it to me.
Talk about that whole process of meeting with the Brewers. It's a major league job opportunity, and you've waited all that time, and just walk us through that process.
Well, the first thing that happened was you see that there is an opening, and that's always something that like gets your heart fluttering a little bit because there aren't many openings.
Yeah.
Think about Major League Baseball. There's 30 teams. There's anywhere between 2 and 4 play-by-play broadcasters between television and radio at those 30 teams. So you can do the math. There's just very few jobs, and you can do it till very late in your life. So there's not a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
So when one does open, everybody, we are the vultures in minor league baseball. We pounce. But this one seemed, I don't know, when I saw that it had opened, I for some reason had an intuition that it was a chance. And so I had applied, and maybe a month later I heard back from the Brewers that they were at least interested in talking to me. So they had asked for more materials, and I sent them some more materials. Materials meaning demo stuff.
Yeah.
When you're hiring a broadcaster, you want to hear what they sound like.
Right.
So more different types of demo samples. And then there was an interview online with several people. And then there was another interview over the phone. And then the last step was coming here. The first time I was ever in Milwaukee was in the middle of January 2022. And I got to have breakfast with Bob Uecker. And that has always been, since he's been here, that's been the last step for anybody who's been hired to be a broadcaster with the team.
Yeah.
You got to meet Bob.
Yeah.
And he's got to give you the rubber stamp.
Yeah. What a great guy and a legend. I mean, that had to be pretty exciting for you to know that you were going to sit down and have breakfast, but also so nerve-wracking because that's kind of the final step you have to get through to get the job that you've been wanting since you've been 11 years old.
That's exactly right. I told myself as I was coming to Milwaukee for that in-person meeting. I said, you might not get this job, but if nothing else, at least you got to meet Bob Uecker,
Exactly.
right? So that wouldn't have been a bad consolation prize. And it was so fun sitting there and listening to Bob tell stories for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough I get to do it now on a daily basis.
Right.
But the first time you meet Bob and you hear him tell his stories, it's unbelievable. I mean, I think I was there for 2 hours, and it just flew by like a snap of a finger.
Did you know when you were done with the breakfast that you'd gotten the job?
No,
Did he say that?
No, I didn't.
Did you know who was in the last round with you by any chance? Did you know who your competition was at that late in the game?
I had an idea.
Okay.
I did.
Well,
but at that stage, anybody that you're going to be up against is so talented. If you get that far in the process of a Major League Baseball broadcasting search, you're up against, I thought, pretty tall odds.
Yeah. So you have breakfast. How long is it before you get that exciting call that you got?
It was the next week. So that breakfast was on a Friday.
Okay.
And later that afternoon, I got on a plane back home, and I had a basketball game to broadcast back in Massachusetts.
Okay.
The next day. So I did the basketball game. And I think the rest of that weekend was pretty sleepless. And then
sure.
The next Monday, I think it was the next Monday, I had gotten word that I was going to have a call with the fellow from the Brewers who was running the search.
Right.
So I figured it was going to be one way or the other. I'd get the news delivered that next day.
Yeah.
And it was good news.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I love to hear that story because you worked hard. You've earned it every step of the way. As you say, you got a little farther, and you almost thought of giving up on the dream you had since you were 11 years old, and then you got the job. That's amazing. Well, let's talk about now that you're here in Milwaukee and you're doing the job, what's been the biggest challenge or the difference, if any, between what you were doing through the minor leagues to now with Bob and Lane, and you're in the big leagues, and talk about that, the transition.
Whew, boy, where do I start? The job itself of calling a baseball game, the mechanics of it, doesn't change that much. And I think that's what's helpful of having done so many minor league games over the years. You really figure out your style, and you figure out how to do it. And I think, I figured out how to do it over the years pretty well, or at least I worked at getting better and better as I moved up. So at least I had that as a background. And then everything else is totally different. The people that you're around, the ballparks, the travel, the hotels, it's eye-opening. I'm glad this is my second year now and not my first anymore. Lane, who you had on the podcast last year from our booths, told me, he said this whole first year, this was coming into 2022. He said this whole first year, it's going to be like drinking water out of a fire hose. And it kind of was. Just figuring out, where do I go and who are these people? Not the actual calling of the game.
The logistics
just the
of
logistics
the job.
of doing it and meeting everybody and going to new cities and all the players and the coaches. And at least this year, as my second year on air and traveling with the team, at least that stuff I know now. I know who the people are. I know where the places are. And so that's a lot less to worry about the second time around.
Do you think there's a big difference with your job from radio to TV?
Very big.
Talk about that. People may be interested in that, the difference between broadcasting a game on TV and on radio.
And I've done both, so I think I can answer this responsibly. On television, your job as a play-by-play broadcaster is really just to be a facilitator. Yes, if a big moment happens, you're going to give it a call, but you punctuate. Brian Anderson is so good at that. Jeff Levering, who does TV now for us, is so good at that. But the rest of the time, especially during baseball, there's not a ton going on. So you're just facilitating the conversation with your analyst, and you want to make the analyst the star. Everybody can see what's happening.
Right.
You don't have to call every pitch. You're really just kind of talking to the pictures. Radio, it's the complete opposite. Nobody knows what's happening unless you tell them it happened.
Right.
So you have to call every pitch, and you have to be descriptive, and you have to paint a picture so that people, while they're listening, maybe there's another 11-year-old kid lying in bed somewhere, that you
saying,
want that
I want to
kid
do
to
this
know.
job.
Yeah, you want them to know exactly what's going on. What did that play look like? How did it develop? So I think you need to be more detailed. You certainly have to be more exact in your descriptions. You can't miss a pitch. And it's a totally different set of skills that you need to be doing radio play-by-play versus doing television.
In order to do your job well as a broadcaster on radio, do you have to get to know the players at all personally, see how they do things? Talk about that.
I think it helps. I will say this, with the new pitch clocks in Major League Baseball this year, the time between pitches is so sped up that a lot of the art of what we did, which is tell stories and educate listeners about players and their backgrounds and tell stories, a lot of that has had to kind of go away. I do find that a bit sad, and we can get into the merits of the pitch clock, of which there are many merits. But one thing I think is going away is the art of storytelling on the radio because of that, and being able to educate more on the.
Well, you brought up Bob Uecker and your breakfast and being able to spend time with them and listen to the stories. For me, a lot of times I would turn on the radio and even have the TV on to be listening to Bob and hear the stories, because a lot of the fun of the broadcast was just listening to Bob. I mean, you could see the game, but listening to what he says, he just makes it so entertaining. And you bring up a really good point, and we started talking about this off podcast before we got started, is this speeding up of the game and the impact it has. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about that and your thoughts just about where a baseball game could go to 4 hours, and now with these new rules, it's obviously much, much quicker. I get the loss of the stories, and I think that is a loss. But what do you think generally for the fan? Is it good? Is it bad? In your personal feelings?
I think it is all good. Now, just to backtrack for a second, I think I feel so much for Bob because of the way that he broadcasts the game it is so predicated on storytelling. Yeah. So he's had to adjust.
Yeah, it's got to be hard.
But of course, Bob can do it. He can do anything.
Yeah.
For the fan, Major League Baseball has, pardon the terrible pun, they have hit a huge home run.
Yeah, I think so.
I can't imagine a change that's happened in the sport ever that's made a bigger difference for the good than what they've done with the pitch clocks this year. And I'm telling you, there are a few people I've come across who say they don't like it, but I think they're just doing it to be contrary. I can't think of a good reason why you wouldn't like it.
I just think to sit at a ballpark for 4 hours, 3 hours and 40, it just gets too long. I mean, for the casual fan and family, I think one of the things we said before we started the podcast is you talk about having a youngster at a game, and how long do you expect them to sit there, for a game? I just think... I think I saw a Brewer game was under 3 hours, or was one even under 2 hours, one game. I mean, that is amazing.
Well, the statistics don't lie. Last year's average game time in Major League Baseball was about 3 hours. The average time right now is about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They have cut a half hour off of the game. And if you think about what that was, it was 30 minutes of nothing.
Yeah.
Because they haven't taken any outs out of the game. You still got to get 27 outs each team.
Right.
So the game is still the game. So what are those 30 minutes that have gone away because of the pitch clocks?
Yeah, fluff.
It was 30 minutes of absolutely nothing happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they have the pitch clock. What other new rules this year are speeding up the game? They've limited how many times you can go to the mound. Is there a certain amount of time you have to get in the box, or is that all dealing with the pitch count?
It's all part of the clocks. So the clock starts with nobody on base at 15 seconds from the time the pitcher gets the ball back from the catcher.
Okay.
So pitcher catches the ball. He's standing on the mound. That clock is running. At 8 seconds, so from 15 to 8, once you get to 8, the batter has to be ready to hit. The batter has to be in the box looking at the pitcher. If not, the batter has violated, and he's charged a strike. Then from 8 to 1, the pitcher has to deliver the pitch. And if the pitcher doesn't deliver that by the time the clock hits 0, then the pitcher is violated and he gets an automatic ball.
I've been in a couple games where that's happened occasionally. How often are you seeing any of these violations?
Less and less.
Okay.
And that's what Major League Baseball was hoping. Initially, they were averaging maybe 1 to 1.5 violations a game.
Okay.
I think for the last couple of months, the data has shown that it's even less than 1 per game on average. So the players have adjusted. The one thing that I have heard as a possible complaint from coaches, there's been a spate of injuries, especially to pitchers, and there is some concern among baseball people that the injury rate to pitchers may have risen because we're asking pitchers to work faster than they were used to.
That's an interesting thought.
That's the one possible downside. I don't think there's enough data to say one way or the other if there's any correlation.
Have you had one memorable moment or one memorable call or a few that have stood out to you over the last 2 seasons?
Yeah, I have. What is great about the way our broadcast is set up, so Brewers Radio, going back to the beginning of Bob Uecker's tenure on air, it's been the same breakdown as to which broadcaster calls the play-by-play for which inning. And so the way it works, Bob or whoever's leading the broadcast will call play-by-play in the first, the second, the fifth, the sixth, and the eighth and ninth innings. So those are 6 of the 9 innings.
Okay.
And then me or whoever is in that number 2 chair will call the other 3 innings of the game. But if the game goes to extra innings, starting in the 10th, I get to take over.
Okay.
Which is really cool. So I have been able to call a handful of Brewers exciting extra inning wins where I get to call the last out. And that's what you want as a baseball broadcaster. You want to be the guy that calls the winning moment.
Right.
And I actually am very fortunate because of the way the setup is here, that if the game goes to extra innings and the Brewers win, I'll get to be the guy that calls it.
It's exciting for me to be here with you because I can see the excitement in all your expressions when you talk about being, a broadcaster for the Brewers in these moments. And obviously we're filming some of this to put on social media, but it really is nice to see you be so passionate at this stage in your career about these moments, because it really shows in your facial expressions and everything. And that's pretty awesome that you've been thinking about this since you've been 11 years old, and now you've conquered that dream and you're still so darn excited about it, which is awesome.
I love it. I love the sport. And I think it probably means more to me, Jason, because of the fact that it took me a little longer to get here than a lot of the others that have reached Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
So I try to appreciate it. Look, when I'm on the air, for these 2 years, I broadcast road games because Bob works the home games.
Yeah.
So whatever ballpark I'm in, whether it's Dodger Stadium or Wrigley or Fenway Park, any of them, I do have to pinch myself and say, well, look where you are. This beats Brockton, Massachusetts, in the studio with the cat.
I was always a big dreamer, and my story is similar to yours. I can remember since I was probably 6 years old, I said I wanted to be a lawyer. And I just, because that's all I said, I just followed the same dream. And I was always a big dreamer. But when you reach where you always wanted to go, it still seems like it's so much bigger than you ever could have imagined, and it's really exciting. And we're both so lucky to be able to have followed those dreams. And as a sponsor of the Brewers Radio Network like we are, and we have the Dishing Out the Double Play campaign that I get to hear you say when there's a double play, and then we get to give money to Feeding America. And in August, I was there on the field. I got to throw out the first pitch. And I was so happy I didn't do a 50 center and throw it into the stands or hit somebody. But because of the calls you're making in the double plays, I think in August I was on the field and I gave a $10,000 check to Feeding America. And the Brewers are just a great organization. It's been exciting to have you. We had Lane, and I've met Bob. Talk for 2 minutes or so just about being with Bob Uecker. I mean, if you've always wanted to be a baseball broadcaster, how amazing is it to have him in a chair that you get to watch and listen? And
you know what? I say this to people who know Bob peripherally, which was a category I would have put myself in until I got here. I knew of Bob, and I could recite every line from Major League and Mr. Belvedere and all that stuff, and the Tonight Show appearances. I think if you know Bob only that way, and you haven't spent a lot of time listening to him call baseball games, the thing that gets overlooked, Bob is a fantastic baseball play-by-play man. And I don't know that he gets the credit he deserves for the art with which he calls the games. I think he's known, obviously he's a comedian, he's an actor, he's a former player, he's all that. But at the end of the day, he is a darn good play-by-play guy, and I've learned from him. And I'm not just talking about get up, get out of here, gone.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the mechanics of calling a top of the first inning and introducing the game and the way that he calls pitches. It's very unique and it's very good. And you can work your whole life and not be as good as Bob, or come close to being as good as Bob is at calling a baseball game. So that for me, just being in his orbit and watching him operate, the way that he does it, I've learned so much just sitting there in the back of the booth. It's a blessing that I've been able to do this and kind of just be a sponge.
Before we let you leave, we, like with all of my guests on the podcast, we're going to put you in what's called the Hupy hot seat.
I love it.
Where I'm going to ask you 3 questions, baseball safety edition, 2 multiple choice, and then 1 true or false. And my crack team, I'm reading these for the first time right now. We'll see how we go here. So the first one is, what percentage of baseball injuries occur during practice? Is it A, 7%, B, 17%, or C, 37%?
I'm going to go with B, 17%.
It's actually 37.
Wow.
I have no idea why. There is no explanation as to why here. I don't know how anyone would even know that. I mean, that's like just pulling something out of an encyclopedia, but I guess it's C, 37%.
Okay.
Question number 2. What is the most common baseball-related injury? Is it A, tendonitis? Is it B, a pulled hamstring? Or is it C, a concussion?
Let's go with B, pulled hamstring.
It's actually A, tendonitis.
That was my
and
other.
here, there actually is a why here. Baseball players get tendonitis around the area of their elbow or rotator cuff because of consistently having to throw a ball. Seems like more of a pitching thing. I don't know if you get tendonitis if you're a position player, but that's the answer. I don't know.
Well, and I think as we were discussing earlier, pitching injuries are way up.
Yeah, I guess.
And so I think that the percentage of injury is
in general is probably
skewed
up.
towards pitchers. Yeah.
Okay, last one. True or false? This is an interesting one. Sliding headfirst into a base is generally safer than sliding feet first.
Ooh, that is a great question.
Isn't that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Sliding headfirst into a base is generally safer than sliding feet first. True or false?
I'm going to go with false.
You're right. False. Why? Because of the risk for injury to the upper extremities and the cervical spine during a headfirst sliding, it is potentially more dangerous than feet first sliding.
They are teaching runners, and more so in recent years, they're trying to teach runners to never go head first if you can help it.
I mean, you can see why.
Right.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for being here today. This was a real treat to hear about your story. It really is awesome for someone like me to listen to the fact that you wanted to get to this dream starting at 11 years old, and you conquered your dream, and it didn't come easy. You had to keep working hard, and just to see your passion here in the studio today was really awesome. So it was great meeting you, and thanks for coming.
Jason, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.